Sorry, we're just trying to get the projector to work.
Will you go medical?
Oh,
Let's see.
so cynical.
Still dancing.
Ooh, woohoo. Okay. Alrighty, are we ready? Welcome, chaps, chapettes, and thems. We are here to plan revolution. The loyal opposition briefing. You've signed up. I have my very LGBTQ inclusive sword of truth from our school's drama department, so I didn't have to make any effort whatsoever with this one. Are you tired of losing the Mormon Civil War to the control freaks making Mormonism malevolent? Then join up with the loyal opposition. This is your orientation briefing. We will find out the current state of play at the battle's front. We will discover 25 of the many brilliant ideas worth fighting for in LDS Mormonism, and maybe the rest. We'll let the CFC join in if they want. And how exactly can we make this revolution, this reconstruction happen? First of all, we need to know our enemy. You cannot win a battle without understanding your foe. Let's discover who they are. It's very simple, and I'm grateful for it being simple, because when you embark on fixing Mormonism, it's really complicated. Like literally, there's a short list of 50 things to fix and a long list of at least 100. But actually, we can keep this simple, and I think that's important, because if we're going to motivate people trained to think very simply, to become revolutionaries, we need to speak to them in simple terms. It's just this. Who is lying to you? Who's lying to you? That's how you know who your enemies are. I mean, no one's perfect, but if someone's repeatedly just lying to you, they're a problem. They're going to mess up your head, they'll mess up your family, and they will mess up your congregation. Who is the father of lies? Everyone? Satan. Satan is the father of lies. Jesus was chatting to the Pharisees next to the treasury in the temple where they were raking in loads of money from the poor. And he said, "You are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there was no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it." So that is very simple. If people are habitually lying to you, their father is Satan. And what does that make them? Satanists. Do I need to say more? That's communicated for me for that. I thought it was quite a rational analysis myself, with scriptural backup. Anyway, if you want detail, we'll continue, because that's enough on its own, I think. Next, please. What are some of the examples of the lies? Just call a few out, people. You're a bit cross. The prophet will never lead you astray. There you go. Any more? Pardon?
We spent no money on Prop 8.
Yes. The church can't afford janitors.
When the prophet speaks, the debate is over.
The debate is over when the prophet speaks. There's no paid clergy in our church. It's the sin of... There's a revelation to begin and end the November policy of exclusion. President Nelson was in a fireball plummeting to earth that had to land in a farmer's field. We're going to build a temple in Shanghai.
President Nelson asked his wife to leave the room so he could write notes and not pleasure himself.
Oh! Well, that's an interpretation of the available facts, yes?
And his first polygamous wife, was,
I'm sure Sherry isn't involved at all.
ransacked and
Yes, in Africa.
pillaged in Africa.
Yes, they were out to kill the prophet, weren't they? Yes. That,
Membership would double in Europe by 2020.
indeed, that was exciting. I was thrilled by that. Thank you, President Teixeira of the Europe Area Presidency. The church they've never hidden anything from anybody since the beginning of time, said Elder Ballard.
If they did,
Yeah.
God would take them.
And if they do to get something wrong, God will strike them dead. Yes.
Joseph Smith didn't want to practice polygamy.
No, he was really reluctant. His sword was on fire. His flaming sword was really, burning a hole in his pocket. Yes?
On the Hinkley, I didn't know we teach that.
Yes, we don't really. 2 years after, he gave a powerful sermon in General Conference about how we can become like God and make planets. Okay, I think that'll do. You could go on for hours. Oh, go on then, Julian.
They are as transparent as they know how to.
They are I think that's true. Because they have no clue. That's about the only honest thing they've ever said. Because they are exactly as transparent as they know how to be. Okay, next. However, if lying isn't enough, there's also stealing. Are they robbing you? I mean, liars and thieves. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows, Paul wrote to Timothy, allegedly, if we believe the historicity of Timothy. The current oligarchy's love of money is gobsmacking. Just the scale of it, even I am almost lost for words. Not lost for words, that never happens. The Wall Street Journal said the church squirreling away in shell companies over $100 billion of investment was the best kept secret in the financial world. There are about 3 million active members of the church. And we are literally the richest religion on the face of the earth in commercial assets. And certainly by capita, but also objectively, the complete commercial funds of the Catholic Church is probably less than we've got. It's so huge, I don't think brains can compute it, or if they do, that's it, game over, they've robbed us. It's so simple, these simple concepts being corrupted by money and lying is just what LDS Mormonism is dealing with. And it's just embarrassing coming to these things with Community of Christ. It's like we're from Taliban Afghanistan and they're from Belgium with those sort of cute Anglican-y sort of let's all hug and love everyone issues, and we'll have a little dispute when we're doing a common consent vote, and we're dealing with this crap. I mean, it's just embarrassing. Let's fix it. Next, please. Other signs, if you need more, they forbid you to access or read or hear information they do not control. These people are dangerous. They demand your unconditional obedience, even if you know, and they've said this, even if you know what they're telling you to do is wrong.
And even if they tell you, we know. But
Yes, you should still do it. Loyalty trumps. Yeah. They keep changing and abandoning doctrines they used to insist were revelations from God, but they never apologize and never accept institutional responsibility for the U-turns. They contradict themselves and each other. Continue, please, my lovely. Thank you. Other signs someone is dangerous to you. Hypocrites. They teach one thing, do the other. They teach, suffer the little children to come unto me, then shun them while claiming to be motivated by compassion for children and say we can't even bless babies. They tell you to live frugally because that's what God requires. You've just got to take the financial hit to serve and do the right things and pay your tithing. But then they justify massive salaries for themselves and their families because they shouldn't have to make that sacrifice they're telling everyone else to. Blatant hypocrisy. Do not forget the basic stipend salary that general authorities and mission presidents of the church receive, because they make sure their sons-in-law get to be mission presidents for 3 years and make a fortune for their kids, is in the top 10% of salaries in Britain and America. Top 10%. And when you add the fact that it's tax-free and all the perks they get, they're probably in the top 2% of wealth. Yes.
They won't pay tithing on that, will they?
Some of them do. I think, I've heard accounts that some of them do turn up to set an example. It's like, really? Yeah. But what's the impact? This mindset adopts the ethics and logic of commercial business world. of capitalism, that the higher you are up a hierarchy, it's okay, it's morally just that your salary should be bigger, your family should be richer, you should have more privilege. And unfortunately, our American brothers tend to not differentiate between capitalism and actual religion, which is why when we complain about this, they're like, oh, that's a very low salary. For if they were in the corporate world, they'd be paid a fortune. And it's like, what has that got to do with anything? Come on. Anyway, but that's what happens. Next, please. So the Civil War model, I'm arguing, is wholly Mormon kosher. The idea that within our church we have a civil war between two completely different religions. Christianity, and I'm using Jesus' sort of model of fighting the Pharisees. It begins in the pre-existence war in heaven. Pop quiz. What were the two sides arguing for in the war in heaven before we came to earth? What was Team Jesus saying the plan of salvation should involve? Choice. And give the glory to God. Yeah. Yeah, lovely. So I'm picking up the local accents. I can't live north of Watford because Bleakley's are from Lancashire, and if I have a conversation with someone from Lancashire, I'm talking like them within 3 sentences, like the genes just emerge. So, absolutely. What was Team Lucifer saying the plan of salvation should be? The way to make everyone good. Unconditional obedience. You'll be told what to do, you'll do it, you don't need to think for yourself. Very simple. Jesus had the same arguments with the Pharisees. So this is why I frame this challenge and what we're facing as this. Because we need to understand this is a case of two opposite religions slugging it out in everyone's hearts and minds and institutionally. And it's been going on since the beginning of time. Next, please. Here's a simple way to understand the difference between Christian Mormons and Pharisee Mormons. Christian Mormons teach people correct principles and trust them to govern themselves. That's simple. Brilliant phrase from Joseph Smith. Scriptures for that. D&C 58 says you've already got permission from God to do your own thing. Whatever you feel inspired to do and it's good, he's already authorized it. And in fact, if you only wait till you're told by leaders what to do and then you do it reluctantly, which describes 99.9% of what happens in a typical LDS ward, you're damned. You're literally like, that's the worst thing to do. In that scripture, and this is, as we're going to keep coming to, they taught me this when I was 14. 14-year-old people of my generation memorized this stuff, understood it, it's not difficult. And now we're living in a religion that is teaching the opposite, and they're expecting us not to remember what we memorized in seminary. The other one, D&C 121, absolute golden gift. This is the last thing you will have to tear from my cold, dead hands if I'm going to lose my testimony of Mormonism. The same message. We already have God's permission. Real leadership, the journey of our lives is to think for ourselves, and leaders can only influence you by persuading you with truth, not because of their authority. It has to be self-evidently true, and that's why you latch on to something. Beautiful, wonderful. Teach people correct principles, trust them. Next, please. Pharisee Mormonism. Teach people correct principles, never trust them to govern themselves, and then teach people the opposite of true correct principles. I had to add that last bit because I'm like, they're not teaching the correct principles anymore, are they? And this is enforced through hyper-vigilant monitoring and judgment and punishments, either informally through the church culture or formally by the leadership clergy in interviews and disciplinary trials. And what this does is it sabotages the most fundamental purpose of Christianity that Jesus taught. He said the definition of being a Christian is how you treat the least of these, my brethren. Is that you get out of your comfort zone and go and if they're horrible to you, if they're beating you, if they're punching you in the face, you get out there and you go to where the sinners are at. And you gently, kindly, patiently influence them to be better. And you bring them in. That is it. He didn't give a monkeys about the people in the fold. They're fine, he said. They've already got their rewards. They're safe. Pharisee Mormonism says you have to have all your leadership class and people and talent in the fold. You cannot leave the fold because it's dangerous out there. You have to build big walls around the fold, and you need to police the fold to keep it safe and make sure that anyone causing problems gets kicked out. So this is, again, I'm trying to present here, this is actually really simple. It's Christianity 101. The problem we're facing in LDS Mormonism is this simple: liars, thieves, not trusting the people to govern themselves. If you want to know more, let's continue, carry on. The church is sitting, I think, on three amazing strengths. We have a lot of experience creating close-knit and often really supportive, amazing communities in the modern age where extended families and communities tend to fragment. Our church has succeeded in bringing people together when it's doing things well and healthily. That's a model. We have amazing doctrinal treasures I'm going to celebrate in a mo, of what I feel we can offer to heal the Christian world, which is the purpose of the restoration, and to be a butt-kicking, credible world religion. I'm not having all this namby-pamby, oh, you only need a few grains of salt to flavour the world. We'll just be tiny and still... No one cares. No one notices you're there. You're nothing. You have to have numbers if you're going to change the world, really. And to be, I'll respond to some of the things that have been said earlier. We've had brilliant speakers talking about the Quakers, for example, and their influence and example from being a small group. But that's an influence and example primarily within a small bubble of Christianity. If you're going to be a world religion, and there are world religions, this is the thing, and they believe much more batshit crazy stuff than we do. I mean, all of them, they believe crazy stuff. They have billions of followers. Why can't we then? Like, even without changing anything. So if we're failing to have billions of followers with our batshit crazy that's less batshit crazy than their batshit crazy, we're really screwing up here. We're just not trying. But if we could also not be batshit crazy and work to our strengths, we could rule the world in a positive, happy, and consensual way. We've got to not lose that ambition. We watched the Church of England start to crash in the 1970s and 80s in the last death throes, and their leaders were saying, it's fine, doesn't matter that no one comes to our church anymore, we're still here, we'll be a voice, a moral reason, we'll do charity work in the community. No one cares what they say anymore. They have no influence in our society on the whole. Most people haven't the first clue who the Archbishop of Canterbury is or what he thinks about anything. Not that it should always be about the leaders. Let's be real. Let's be ambitious. We can do this. We're as good as these people. We're better than lots of them. We have the potential when we're getting it right, but we are self-sabotaging on such an epic scale. It's gobsmacking. And we've seen better. The people of my generation, we've lived through better in the 80s and 90s before they really clamped down on the homophobia and all the rest of it and made that their religion instead and started robbing us. 21 years ago, Ensign Peak started. Okay. What are some of the things worth fighting for? Now this, if you've got fed up with this church and left and you're never coming back to it again and it's just toxic poison, fine. But I want to at least reassure you, you are not stupid to love this religion. You are not stupid. We've been lied to a lot, we've been bamboozled, we've been on a journey. But I just, for the people still willing to do the fight, here's why. But if you are at peace with leaving, absolutely wonderful, that's fine. And I just want to reassure you, you are not stupid to love this religion because it has some of the best and biggest ideas that there are in religion, or bar none. And here's a few of them. First of all, we embrace awe at the nature of our existence and the scale of the visible universe. We're in a universe we now know that has 2 trillion galaxies in it. And each of those galaxies are hundreds of billions of solar systems with habitable planets. I mean, the scale of that is astonishing. Mormonism, it loves that, and it fills every one of those habitable planets with a purpose. It's not just God overdoing the showing off to the people on this speck of dust. So think big. We're taught that Joseph Smith sort of began as a young person looking at the stars. He looked up at the universe and started to wonder. And that was fundamental to his religious journey. Unfortunately, he then got a bit obsessed by hemlines and kind of distracted by the lady people. And sadly, that's a metaphor for the whole church. We started off with amazing doctrines. Now they're mostly obsessed with the hemlines and the pawn shoulders. And, it's the same journey. Number 2, the Book of Abraham, despite its various flaws, builds a bridge to modern astrophysics. It talks about space-time. It talks about the nature of gravitational relationships between stars and solar systems. Wow, how cool is that? It talks about the nature of time and eternity. If you want to be a Christian scientist, be a Mormon. Next, please. Science has now made plausible every key component of religious reality. And this is something I have a lot of fun teaching my kids at school. For religion in general to be real, certain kind of physical realities have to be possible or real. And they kind of boil down to omnipotence, that you can have an intelligent being with ultimate power. Omnipresence, gods usually are conscious of everything going on everywhere in a very vast universe. Many dimensions of space with different laws of physics. You have to have the dimensions that the spirit world is in, or heaven or hell or whatever it is. It's a real place, but things are different there. What is a spirit compared to a body and so on. And you have to have the idea that you can control matter with your thoughts. Now, modern science doesn't prove any specific religion true, but since the early 20th century, when we thought religion had been disproved by science and that argument was over and science won, we're back in the game, everyone. Now is the time. Don't be ashamed of being religious. Omnipotence, dark energy, dark matter, the dominant forces in the universe. Incredibly powerful, far more powerful than gravity. We have no idea what they are. They're invisible, but they're literally everywhere. One of the theories is the literal space of space is filled with these things. Well, that's exactly what religions describe God being. A power in the universe everywhere, super powerful, controlling it, holding galaxies together. Omnipresence, being aware of everything. Einstein at first said that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. Therefore, information could not travel faster than the speed of light. Quantum physics has blown that up. Quantum entanglement means that particles of energy at the opposite ends of the universe can instantaneously respond to each other and communicate information. And that is because it all started in one place. It all began in one singularity and expanded. So you can have information transmitted across the entire galaxy at way faster than the speed of light, instantaneously. We have proven omnipresence is a thing. Many dimensions of space, Stephen Hawking and co are up to 11 now. That's more than we need. Pre-existence, 3 kingdoms. We don't even get to half of 11. And that are the 3 dimensions, or 4th if you include time, that we are conscious of and experiencing are connected with the other dimensions, which would be enough to have a spirit living inside your body, all part of the same life form, And they're saying seriously that the way birds navigate, the way human consciousness works, could well involve dipping into those other dimensions of space using quantum physics. Mind over matter. The two slit experiment. If you fire beams of light through 2 slits, it behaves at the same time as a particle going in a straight line and a wave that will kind of go through both at once. But if you observe it, if you have a mind, even a mechanical mind, a camera or a machine observing that, it changes its state and it just becomes a particle going in a straight line. It stops having its waveform behavior. Literally mind over matter. Scientists can show that to you in a laboratory. Now, I'm not a science expert, and I may have got some of the extreme details of that slightly iffy, but that's the world we're in now. We're back in the game. Science is not antithetical to religion, and Mormonism has always embraced science when it was doing it right. Next, please. We have a robust answer to the age-old philosophical problem of evil. If God made us and he's nice, why are we suffering so much? And he is responsible. If God made us ex nihilo from nothing, with foreknowledge, knowing that before he made this person, he's going to end up burning them in hell for eternity, what's God? Freaking sadist. The Orthodox Christian God is a sick, sick sadist. He makes life forms in order to torture them forever. There's no way around that. Except we have a way around it. Oh, we're co-eternal with God. It's not his fault. We've always existed as an intelligence with the potential to progress, as long as God has. There's something bigger, universal reality, whatever you want to call it. We've saved the Christian God with this weird doctrine of Joseph's that we've always existed as long as God has, from its Achilles heel, its kryptonite. Christianity cannot survive the idea of a God creating us out of nothing. It entirely destroys its entire foundation. And we have the answer in one of these weird things Joseph Smith taught, and that we have integrated in our religion and scripture. Next. Also, the opposition in all things talks about the need for the nature of reality to include a journey, choices, and things like that. I won't get into that too deeply because that takes a while. Next, please. Our scriptures, though, are as much about metaphysics as about physics. We have several. We've got Nephi, we've got D&C 93, talking about how the nature of existence depends on this binary relationship of opposites. And this is where the scientists are: matter, antimatter, supersymmetry between particles. It's all about balances of opposites in tension with each other. That's how the fabric of the universe works, and our scriptures apply that to our own moral journey as part of that fabric of the universe. Next, please. The Book of Mormon in Alma 32 teaches us to use the actual scientific method to get a testimony. I mean, we could not be more science-friendly if we tried. You have a hypothesis, you experiment with it, you observe your results, but you don't overclaim. The mistake of Pharisee Mormons is if you felt warm and fuzzy because someone hugged you at a sacrament meeting, that means Joseph Smith was a prophet, and the Book of Abraham was translated from some papyri, and you should definitely tell your 5-year-old girl to put a cardi on. You're overclaiming the connections here. This scripture delightfully warns you. You only know about that one thing. When you do the experiment and have a positive faith-promoting experience, it's limited to that experience, and that kind of speaks to the discussion you were having earlier about miracles. Says, is your knowledge perfect? No. You have to continue. You need to do more experiments. Check out the next thing. Start to make the connections. Do not assume the whole thing is true because you found one little bit of it is true. Ah, genius. Mormonism has a cosmology and purpose for our existence that is far more in common with Eastern religions than mainstream Christianity. We're meant to have world ambitions here. There are far more people in China and India and the East in their religious and philosophical world than in Christian West, you know? We need to speak to these people. We can. I've had conversations based on Doctrine and Covenants 93 with people from Eastern religious traditions, and we had stuff to say to each other that most Christians do not. And they also, on the whole, have the idea that your soul is an eternal Atman, a spirit that is a fragment of the divine on a journey to learn and eventually become back to being one with God. I mean, we absolutely parallel that with the Mormon plan of salvation. In the temple, we go fully animist and Catholic. Animist cultures, tribal cultures, initiate their young into an immersive theatre experience where you relive the stories of your ancestors and are taught the purpose of life and the nature of the world you're in and your existence. Wonderful, these great, deep, ancient cultural traditions of humanity. We do that in the endowment. We wear silly clothes and do stuff, and people perform when we're doing it properly. They've just killed the life endowment, of course. Back one, sorry. Oh no, that was it. And Catholic. My second date with Lynn was to the crypt of Canterbury Cathedral, because I'm like that. And she spent longer in the second-hand bookshop than I did, so that was it. You know, I was in love. It's never happened since, of course. The fool, she made that one mistake. And I was in there with all this, you know, the little stand selling candles to burn a candle as a prayer for your dead ancestors, get some time off purgatory. And I was like, apostasy, you know. And then I'm like, oh, for frig's sake, we do this, don't we? I pay tithing to go into a temple to do rituals to get my ancestors out of purgatory. It was very embarrassing because I've really enjoyed being judgmental about Catholics for most of my life. And I was an idiot all along. So we can let's embrace this. The Catholics, they're just obsessed with death. So are we. Let's hug, we can talk to these people. Carry on. Mormonism's Freemasonry connections are a good thing. I've had the weird and enlightening experience of getting to know several Mormon Masons. I met some on my mission. And they are devastated about what our leadership are doing to the endowment because it's knocking off all the good stuff. Freemasonry taught Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and others. It was like the final piece in the puzzle to get the whole picture here. It taught them to embrace knowledge from every corner of the world. That's a Freemasonry principle. It taught them that you can educate people through ritual, through immersive theatre, through costume and handshakes and whatever. That this is an education system that is very powerful and effective and opens up the mind to revelation without being entirely specific. And back one, sorry. And it's been a long time coming, but they're about to publish Method Infinite, which is by some leading scholars of Mormonism and Masonry, talking about this powerful Masonic influence on Mormonism. We usually have that on the list of things to be embarrassed and horrified by, and why did Joseph Smith just suddenly produce the endowment months after being inducted as a Master Mason? Cool, because what came out of it was some of our best ideas. Next, please. Mormonism embraces the real timeline and history of the development of human civilization, as we see in Minerva Teichardt's beautiful mural in the Manti Temple, which they were going to destroy, but they've now promised not to. I don't believe them, because they just destroyed the Salt Lake Temple's murals. But we'll hopefully, fingers crossed, there was a big protest and they listened, which we'll come back to later. Next. Number 11. The Book of Mormon says that God speaks to all people and cultures and gives them scriptures, and they don't have to be descendants of Israel. This one verse, I'll speak to the Jews and they shall write it. I'll speak to the Nephites, they shall write it. I'll speak to the other tribes of the house of Israel, which I've led away, they shall write it. And I shall also speak to all nations of the earth, and they shall write it. That opens up unbelievable ecumenical possibilities. The founders of our religion said Mormonism is truth from wherever it comes from, and they listed infidels, so however negative you feel about any of the other religions, they've got truth, we can bring it all in. So next time you're talking to people in other faiths, learn from them. What truths have they got that we can add to our Mormonism? It's in our scriptures. God spoke to them. Well, they haven't buried their scriptures in the ground, have they? They're in their temples and their schools. They discuss them. They're there, they're living scriptures in the world's traditions, and the Book of Mormon gives us permission to embrace all the good that they have. Next. Alexander Campbell thought he was debunking Mormonism when he did his list of, isn't it convenient that Joseph Smith fixes all these issues, infant baptism, ordination, the Trinity, regeneration. Well, flip that script. It's taken Christians, billions of them, 2,000 years to not fix those things. And here comes Joseph Smith, some peasant from New York State. He fixes them. Yay! Awesome. Next. The foundational creation myth of Mormonism is not the Garden of Eden, where weak human beings rebel against God and mess up his plans. It's a titanic struggle for free agency, freedom, against an ideology of totalitarian control. It could not be more modern. That is our foundation myth, not some naked lady talking to a snake and making poor vegetable choices. How cool is that? Next, please. Freedom, as part of that, is the first law of heaven, not obedience. We're all used to our speakers at church, you've got to do a talk about home teaching. Home teaching is the first law of heaven. It's the most important thing ever. Homemaking is the first, scripture study is the most important thing you could ever do. Aha. But genuinely, freedom, first law of heaven, the one that we had to fight for. And God gave us that freedom. He hosted a free debate, a democratic process. That was the beginning of our journey to sentience. Carry on. Feminism is built into this religion, despite appearances. We have goddesses, maybe. Really, in Christianity, that's pretty amazing. And not just when it's done right, as like the vessel, the womb that bore Jesus. Lots of people can become goddesses, not just the one Mary. Scriptures in Jacob in the Book of Mormon absolutely speak to the Me Too moment. They condemn the Nephites for treating women as property and sex objects. And it says that is the reason the Nephites will lose the promised land. It wasn't anything, it's really specific, because the Lamanites treat their women better. Total feminism right there in the Book of Mormon. Feminist Eve. Eve was the first and greatest avatar of Christ. She chose to take on mortality and suffer and die to give all humanity life. No male figure in our scriptures come anywhere close to matching Jesus than that. She was the first Christ on the earth. And she showed male leadership skills. The reason women were often kept out of the boardroom and military leadership or whatever was the idea that women can't be decisive under pressure. You know, they have to phone a friend and talk about how they're feeling while the big decision is looming, and their wombs will just mess up their decision-making processes once a month, and they're not decisive. They're not just making tough decisions in the battlefield. You know, Eve totally did all that, and she did far better than the bloke. She actually got stuff. She dealt with complex situations, made a right judgment, and went for it with courage. She was adventurous. She was an explorer. She was like, I'm a bit bored here. My wife's like that all the time. You know, every 5 minutes, let's get a new house and redecorate it completely differently. So, you know, I try to remember that's a positive attribute from Eve. Carrying on. Number 15, the Book of Mormon offers unique contributions to just war theory. Usually, and this is particularly interesting for a community of Christ who are engaged in this resolution about peace. Usually, any discussion of this in religious context has to lean either towards pacifism or being a just warrior. Book of Mormon says both are absolutely fine and you should tolerate each other. It justifies war on the basis of defense, and definitely use sneaky strategy and spying if it will reduce the number of deaths. You know, use your intelligence services to prevent war or to get an advantage over an opponent, to avoid actual carnage. There are clear criteria for when a just war is justified, but if you're an anti-Nephi Lehi and have made a commitment never to kill anyone again, that's also equally virtuous. And rather than putting those people in prison for being conscientious objectors, you should actually protect those people who aren't willing to fight. Like the Lamanites did, the Nephites did put guards around the nation of Jerem, which is where their Lamanite pacifist refugees were living, and they protected them from the other Lamanites. And they didn't find that a moral conundrum. They respected their choice, but they were willing as just warriors to die to protect the pacifists. Fascinating. Next, please. God has a plan to save everybody who wants salvation. And we need to not forget how revolutionary that is in Mormonism, where huge Christian denominations already condemn huge numbers of people to hell before they're even finished living, and doesn't have that as a foundational principle. This was revolutionary in Mormonism compared to huge swathes of the Christian world. And I've encountered the people who believed the opposite of that in all kinds of places in Christian settings. Next, please. The complete destruction of traditional concepts of male priesthood and power in section 121. It dig all the worldly ideas that you have authority because of your status, your job role, your ordination, that you should be obeyed because of that, because of a system. It says your only power to influence other people is unconditional, patient love and kindness, and you persuade them of truth. You win their minds and their hearts, not their obedience or loyalty. And that's enough, and that changes the world. Next, please. 18, the law of common consent, as we've been hearing in this conference, offers Mormons a model for democratic scrutiny and oversight of decision-making by those in power. The Book of Mormon is about democracy in politics. The Doctrine and Covenants is all about democracy in religious leadership. And we need to own that, because we've been told the lie over and over again that this is not a democracy, we are a theocracy, it's a dictatorship, there is no loyal opposition in our religion, which is complete nonsense. And we saw in one of the early presentations this. So this is the church manual for Doctrine and Covenants. I think it's an institute manual. It comes up as number 2 or 3 if you Google common consent. And in it, it has this phrase, which fascinates me, because this idea cannot die, however much they try. It's not a quote from anyone, it just says it in the manual. Not only are church officers sustained by common consent, but this same principle operates for policies, major decisions, acceptance of new scripture, and other things that affect the lives of the saints. This is one of the biggest lies in Mormon. Of course we don't do that. But it's saying we do. I mean, it's ridiculous. But wow, memorize this, everyone. I keep waiting for it to disappear, because I've been talking about this for several years now. I'm like, some minion's going to edit that out, but it's still there. If we did that, we would have an entirely different church. We wouldn't have most of the problems, because we would moderate the decision-making of the leadership. They would have to listen to the people before they even suggested anything, because they know it's going to have to pass a scrutiny and a vote. That is our only hope to save the church. We have to get back to that. Our primary scripture is an anti-white supremacist epic. I get so fed up with people saying the Book of Mormon is racist. I'm like, read to the end. I have no time for that. That's intellectual laziness. It begins with a state of intense racism. You have the brown-skinned people are filthy and dirty, and the Nephites hate them and have all the racist tropes going on. But then what happens? The sons of Mosiah give up the throne and say, these are our brothers. They use the language of the civil rights movement. These people are our brothers. We will go and do whatever we have to reconnect with them, stop being racist. And they succeed, and they create a society of racial harmony. And in the long run, it's the brown people who triumph, because white supremacism is evil and it fundamentally corrupts your society. It means that you also treat your women badly, as we've heard in Jacob. There's intersectionality with bigotry, which we see play out in the Book of Mormon. The brown people end up proving to be the real heroes of the story. It's an anti-white supremacist epic. And can you imagine the different history our church would have had if instead of embracing slavery and racist segregation, our leaders had stuck with that? It would have been a completely different timeline. But let's reboot. Let's re-own that. Next, please. 20. Article of Faith 11 is a powerful first introduction to the idea of tolerating and protecting diversity in a neutral secular space. We claim the privilege of worshipping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege. Let them worship, I would say, or live as consenting adults, where, how, where, or what they may. That's the safe society. That's the real Zion, not a monoculture that becomes dysfunctional as we see in Utah. Also, just for fun, a hardcore alternative Nightmare Before Christmas story. If you're sick of years and years of the schmaltz and the cute little angels, how about the Christmas Eve story where everyone's going to be slaughtered unless Jesus gets born? Kind of adds an edge. It's like the Saw version of Christmas. Next, please. Alma 30 speaks to modern history and politics and the loss of religion in the modern age. It is written for our time. The Book of Mormon was published decades before Marx's critique of religion as the opium of the masses, decades before Origin of Species. But it specifically describes both of those things and all the other big ideas that have, perhaps inaccurately, but nonetheless very factually, been used to deconstruct people's religious faith in the modern age. Darwinism, and particularly social Darwinism, which led to fascism and eugenics, is described in Corey Hall's arguments. Karl Marx's critical analysis that religion is used to oppress the people, to stop them making a Zion here and now when they could, to bow down their heads to religious authority figures in the status quo, to not take the fruits of their labours. is specifically involved in what Corihor said. You might end up agreeing with Corihor, of course, but the point being, these are powerful arguments against religion, whether functional or corrupt religion. It's in the Book of Mormon. Know the dates. Those two things were published decades after Joseph Smith included them and loads of other rational arguments against religious belief in one chapter in the Book of Mormon. That's the second thing you have to prize from my cold dead hands to say Joseph Smith was not a prophet. 23, logical ideas about what angels and devils are. This is always a bit of a fishy one. You know, Muslims have ideas about the jinn and these weird random spirits that God made for some reason. Generic Christianity, you know, angels, devils, it's all just a bit odd, isn't it? It doesn't quite fit with what God is really meant to be about or what he's doing. But in Mormonism, they're us. We're all the same. We're all brothers and sisters. We're all spirits making our choices. It's a kind of a rational resolution of a very weird aspect of world religions. 24, the Book of Mormon insists that our teaching and revelations to us should be plain and precious truths. I just love that, because people trying to bamboozle you will overcomplicate everything or just make it all mystical. You know, the prophet can see over the next hill, so just trust him. But unfortunately, the prophet doesn't actually explain to you what he's seeing over the next hill. You just have to enter this weird sort of bamboozled mystical space where he's done something really horrible and egregious to your children, but you just have to take it because he can see something you can't. When the entire point in Mormonism is he's meant to tell you. You're not meant to believe anything they say till they explain it to you. That's why you have a living prophet. They've flipped that script to the literal opposite of what our whole religion is meant to be about and their role as prophets is meant to be about. And it's blatant, it's shameless, and they're getting away with it. But then I always have to say, no, they're not. They're getting away with it with the really annoying, frustrating people sitting on the pews in an average LDS congregation who can't see through all this. But the vast majority, more than 80%, of UK Mormons have seen through this in whatever way. One or other of these aspects has failed, and they've left. The vast majority of Mormons are not stupid. They've seen through it. And we were all there, so we need to be a bit patient with the ones who aren't woken up yet. But they will see it, and the church will disappear. So this has to change. That's right. Social justice and wealth distribution is huge in the Book of Mormon. It's there in our fast offering systems and welfare and so on. But it's been absolutely, again, flipped on its head by a far-right... and I'm a Tory. I've never voted for anyone liberal or left-wing in my entire life. If I was in America, I'd be a Democrat, you know. But these people are nuts. And they've taken full-on, pure, raw capitalism as their religion, and that's impacted everything. And they will jump on anything that even smells like socialism, even though early Mormons practiced communal living, redistribution of wealth. You know, you don't have to call it socialism because there's a lot of baggage with that, but that concept of if there's poverty in your community, you've failed. You know, that's a fundamental principle. Okay. Natasha Helfer said in her keynote address at the beginning of this conference that there's this conundrum. How is it that a religion, or a denomination we should say, that is that dysfunctional, like so messed up, still produces amazing people, like the best people you will ever meet, kind, I naturally gravitated to looking at you, Ilana. Big-hearted, generous, hard-working to help people in need without hesitation in most cases. Just amazing, intelligent, thoughtful people. Even when we're dissidents, we're still like handling it with passion and commitment, and you know. It's because we also teach them all Christianity. We're being taught both religions. And my whole thing is we just need to give people permission to see the difference, to knock off the Pharisee crap and go with the Christianity that is inside all of them. And that gives me hope. Next, please. So exactly, just going to finish now with a few thoughts. Well, how do we make this change happen? We've identified the problems. We've identified that we have amazing things that are being downplayed and ignored by our current leadership in the LDS Church. First of all, what not to do. Again, this is know your enemy. do not bother waiting for a younger, woker generation of apostles and prophets. It never happens. By definition, they don't become the person in the top chair until they are granddads well out of touch and ancient and slipping into dementia. They're never going to be a young, woke prophet, is there? Ever. The whole system makes that impossible, so don't bother with that. And Bednar, because of the age, maths, is probably going to be president of the church in the future for a decade. I mean, the idea of future and Bednar 10 years doesn't kind of work in my head anyway. Yeah, that's fine. I know, that's a bit more depressing. The current insider apologists and reformers, they're not the answer. They're trying. I love them. Bless their hearts. They're all wrong. Their fundamental delusion is they think that changes can be done incrementally. They can just release another book that nudges the edge a little bit further, move the conversation along. The Givens are doing this, Patrick Mason's doing this, all these people are doing this. And it's all based on the idea that we will have more generations of young people. We're not even hanging on to the one we've got. I mean, it's utterly delusional. But what that then means is they become ineffective because they will not challenge the Q15. They think they just have to wait for these people to die and then the change will happen. As long as they've sowed some positive ideas over the decades, like it has in the past, we'll gradually get there. Completely delusional. I think it's because they live in Utah mostly and in the intellectual bubble of Mormon history and Brigham Young University, and the church feels unassailable there, as I said earlier in the panel, because it runs the state, it controls everything. But they're a tiny, tiny little dot on a very large map of the world. It's totally delusional. Their little kingdom will fall. It is already falling. So that they haven't got the answer because their baseline is, I cannot criticize the leaders openly. I cannot challenge them. Otherwise, I will lose my funding, I will lose support, and I will stop having this gradual influence. There's no time for it. They're wasting their time anyway. You might as well have some fun and get feisty. Next, please. They tried the Latter-day Saint Radical Orthodoxy Manifesto. Read this thing. It's a complete shit show. I am covering it in one of the many unreleased episodes of my podcast. It'll be coming up soon. But you had a lot of the leading apologists and insider reformers sign this thing. Patrick Mason had the sense not to. Another tick for Patrick. But the Givens did, perhaps because their son wrote it. And this is what annoys me. He wrote it really badly. Like if a 14-year-old that I teach had presented me with this document, there'd be red pen all over it. He repeats himself, it's irrational, it contradicts itself. And they're scholars, they're teachers at university. But they didn't do the spell check for their own son, blind spot, sadly. And they're a bit embarrassed now that they signed it. Lots of other people did who are in this sort of realm of apologizing for the church. And it just contradicts itself. It says, we want to be radical and forward-thinking, but not. We'll be utterly, entirely loyal to the leaders. Every other paragraph is a declaration of unquestioning loyalty to the leaders. Therefore, well, you can't change anything then. Anyway, read it and you'll realize what a mess it was. Yeah. Well, we're nearly there. Next, please. Yeah, so I've talked about that. Next, please. But that has wiped out a whole generation of apologists. They just fell on their face very publicly with that one document, and they revealed all the fundamental flaws in their approach, and they're still licking their wounds, and they've lost a lot of credibility. But that clears the air for something that might actually work. So this is our time. Being the change in local areas is not going to save the church. People have been doing that for decades. My parents have done it. My woke stake president, being LGBTQ inclusive, has done it. They've still lost 25% of their active membership in the last 10 years. While they're spending time making life a bit more tolerable for a few small groups of demographics, they lost half the families in their ward. So that is not enough on its own. It has to be, the whole system needs challenging. The immovable iceberg the good ship Zion is heading for is young people will not remain in a church that's racist, and Dallin Oaks is bringing that back. He's still teaching that the racism was God's will, repeatedly. Even at the B1 event celebrating getting rid of it. He's that stubborn, Sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and truthphobic. They're not going to stay. That is, you can't change their minds about that. That's the immovable object. You have to sail around it. You have to address this. We are going to have to ordain women, LGBTQ inclusion, total honesty about the history. Simple. Apologise for the racism. If that doesn't happen in the next few years, not decades, few years, game over. The last 10% of our young people will be gone. And they're the future missionaries, which is why the missionary numbers are plummeting. You've just destroyed the whole system. It will fall fast. It's only going to take 10 or 15 years to destroy most of the church functionally in the world. And then it's just waiting for the few remaining elderly people to die, and then you sell the building. And that's already happening. Like, people post every week now, don't they? Another stake centre up for sale. So, regime change, restoration of common consent, bringing back the democracy is the only way. The great news, it's always been there, it's in our scriptures, it was the whole point all along. We don't have to invent a new religion. The only change, really, that is a change is getting women into those leadership positions. Trust democracy. Directly vote opposed. We're given that opportunity, again, as we heard earlier. Yes! So Nemo is exploring that and where that can go. Well, you can vote. They ask you several. You got 2 general conferences, a ward conference and a state conference. You've got 4 opportunities every year to put your hand up in public and say, no, these leaders are screwing up. Can we replace them, please? Use that power. And if we can motivate people to get over the fear of doing that or the consequences, that will scare the poo out of them because they're very, very nervous. Next, please. Or less painfully, as soon as the leadership get wind that the general mood has changed to something, they will suddenly have a revelation. They will change it. So we need to talk about it. We need to be vocal. They need to feel threatened that large numbers of their members are now on board with voting opposed to them. Then they'll change to just in time to prevent that happening in real life. Either way, it works. Same result. That's what has worked for all the recent changes in the church. Sudden radical change is possible in our church. They've done it with polygamy. They did it with racist segregation. 3.5 years to turn around the November policy. Because the middle level managers of the church fed back, this is unacceptable, we can't carry on. You have that power. And to finish off, there is one amazing, brilliant example we should learn everything about, mostly because it's the funniest thing ever in Mormon history, and there's a lot of competition for that you can bring about rapid change. Next, please. Oral sex gate. Here's the maths. 1981. Ignore this bottom bit. 1809. 1800 is how many months it took the church to decide to stop being a racist, segregating religion. 150 years, 1800 months. How many months to turn around a fatwa forbidding oral sex and asking about that in a Temple Recommend interview from President Kimball in 1981? 9 months, just enough to have a baby. So, do the maths. If enough local people, including local leaders, protest, as they did in 1981, this is donkey's years ago, they will completely reverse a Temple Recommend question. Oral sex gate, next please. Yeah, sorry, back one. So, back, sorry. So, this is it. We need to encourage members of the church and its leaders to care more about just surviving and their kids staying in the church than cunnilingus, than yodeling in the gully. They need to care more about that than scuba diving. And they're very passionate about cunnilingus, yodeling in the valley, and scuba diving. It took them 9 months to rebel against a prophet of God about a Temple Recommend question for them to completely reverse it, while blaming the local leaders for that, of course. The letters are hysterical. So let's do that maths. We can do that again. But the Mormons need to care as much about their own survival and their children as they care about oral sex. And they're clearly extremely passionate, literally, about oral sex. So, if while you're campaigning for all these things, they threaten you with a trial and excommunication to remove the covenants you made while wearing a silly hat. Turn up, get a bigger and better hat, and carry on. And eventually, most of them are going to leave the church, and you'll be all that's left. Next, please. You'll become more powerful than they can possibly imagine, because you'll be in charge. You just have to be really stubborn. Next, please. Thank you. Join the loyal opposition.